This week on SUNUP, Kim Anderson is getting concerned about the price of wheat.
And we could get down another 50 cents. Now we could go down and see 420, 425 momentarily for a couple of days and come back up, but I am watching this really close.
And it's all about the brakes. John Weir talks fire brakes.
Sometimes we do need fire brakes that are 8 to 10 foot wide, bare ground. Sometimes we can get by with narrower fire brakes.
Oklahoma agriculture starts right now at SUNUP.
Hello everyone and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We want to begin the show today talking about Oklahoma's winter canola crop. We're joined by Josh Lofton, our Extension Cropping System Specialist. And Josh, let's just kind of start off with an overview of how the crop's looking right now.
Well, since our last update, the crop has really gained a lot of steam. You know, late in last fall, we had a lot of a really good crop up here. You know, your north central, your central part of the state. It's a little questionable on the southwest. They planted it late. They didn't have a whole lot of moisture. We were really iffy, and it all depended on the freeze, when our first freeze was going to happen. Luckily for us, that freeze was well into December, and a lot of that crop came up and is looking good. So pretty much across the state, we're looking at a really good crop. We have a lot of good steam going into the spring, so we're sitting really good right now.
Let's talk about these unseasonably warm temperatures and kind of what that's done to the crop and what some of the production guidance would be as a result.
Yeah, so because it has been so warm, the crop got a little bigger growth on it, took up its fair share of nutrients, had a lot of vegetation. We saw a lot of this purpling of the canola late in the year, and then beginning when we started seeing that new growth this year, that purpling is just a sign of stress. So the canola plant's under stress, and that could be through many things, standing water, really low temperatures, but it also could be a nutrient stress, and that's where growers need to start realizing that now's the time to start, you know, trying to make up for those stresses and go out and manage them accordingly. And
so what do they need to do in terms of management tips given this situation?
Right now, priority number one needs to be top dress. If you haven't top dressed, now's the time to do it. You know, we've had a lot of guys have to kind of hold on to their nitrogen just because we've been waiting on moisture. Hopefully in the near future, we can get that associated moisture to where we can put out some of that material and get it in. If you're running liquid, you're a little better off because you can put it in with maybe not as much moisture associated. The second thing is, depending on your crop stage, that last glyphosate application, if you're in Roundup Ready systems, is also in that top priority. Once you've got about those multiple leaves set on it, especially once you've gone reproductive, it's off label to put the glyphosate out. So you have to make sure that your crop's in the right situation when you're putting that last Roundup application out.
And then how about scouting for insects? Is it too early? Should we start?
Well, if we keep on the bearing that we're doing right now and essentially getting into spring real early, now's the time. We're starting to see some of those insects pop up in real isolated spots, maybe a certain spot in the field, and some people might not have seen any yet. But if it continues to warm and we continue to get this warmer weather and we don't have these real heavy frosts and freezes, it's time to get boots on the ground and start looking for those insects to where we can get ahead of the curve. You know, the aphids are a big thing this time of year when we're starting to re-green up. So make sure you're looking for those aphids, making sure you're looking for diamondback moth larvae. Those are going to be our big ones. And make sure you're scouting. Just because you're going across the field with your glyphosate or with a nutrient application doesn't mean that you just put a pyrethroid in the tank. Make sure you're scouting, because just putting in an insecticide could do you more damage than benefit.
Last but not least, you and the team are gearing up for the No-Till Conference. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we have a great lineup set up for the No-Till Conference this year. It's actually the 1st and the 2nd of March down in Norman. Like I said, it's a great lineup. We got a lot of good topics, a lot of good timely topics talking about low input in a conservation-based system. So get ready for that.
Okay, sounds great. Josh, thanks a lot.
you.
And for a link to the No-Till Conference registration, go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Hi, I'm Al Sutherland with your Mesonet weather report. Our warm weather is showing up in different ways. Spring tulip bulbs are emerging. This picture was taken on Wednesday morning in Norman in a mulched landscape bed. The freeze hours for February 18th through the 24th shows half the state with no freeze hours. Those hours slowly increased west of a line close to Interstate 44. Mesonet sites farther west had more hours and colder minimums. Kenton had the most hours, 24 hours below freezing over those 7 days. Places with no freeze hours mimic our recent rain pattern. Areas colored green on this map had more than an inch of rain. The highest total was 2 21/100 inches at Byers, near where McLean, Pontotoc, and Garvin counties meet. Unfortunately, west of Interstate 44 and north of Interstate 40, the rain dropped off quickly. Tulsa had 58/100 of an inch, while North Oklahoma City only 4/10 of an inch. Lighter blue areas had less than 1/4 of an inch. Now here's Gary with a look at 2016 rain accumulations and our spring outlooks.
Thanks, Al, and good morning, everyone. Well, Al gave us the good and the bad news. Lots of rain across the southeastern half of the state, but not much across the northwestern half. That also brings us to the good and the bad news of the latest drought monitor map. So let's take a look at that. Now, if you remember last week, we did see that yellow, abnormally dry color start to encroach upon south central Oklahoma. The rain did take care of that area, and we don't have those yellow areas down across south central Oklahoma anymore. But unfortunately, we still have that yellow blotch up there in the northwestern Oklahoma around Roger Mills and Ellis counties. And the bad news is that's liable to grow unless we get appreciable rainfall up across our northwestern parts of the state very soon. Now, more good news. If we look at the March through May outlooks from the Climate Prediction Center, we see for temperature increased odds of below normal temperature across the western half of the state. Now, for precipitation, we see increased odds of above normal precipitation for the western 2/3 of the state, and especially out across far western Oklahoma and the western panhandle. So a mix of good news and bad news, but the good news is that El Nino still lurking down in the equatorial Pacific, still hoping to get some impacts from that with some wetter than normal weather. We'll just have to wait and see and calm this fire weather down, give those crops some moisture, and then we'll take a look at it next week. That's it for this time. We'll see you on the Mesonet Weather Report.
There's not really a perfect time for selecting the perfect bull, is there, Megan?
No, that's a great point, Dave, because one of the most important things to remember about selection decisions is that they're really long-term decisions that impact the herd for a long time. So doing a really good job selecting bulls or females, for that matter, really begins a long time before you step out onto the ranch to buy that bull.
Now, let's go through the bull selection. I mean, there's not the perfect bull. It kind of depends on what your herd looks like.
That's exactly right. So the first step in a good bull selection scheme is really to sit down and figure out what your breeding objectives are. And your breeding objective basically just outlines things like your marketing plan, whether you're going to keep replacement females or whether you have a terminal breeding system, what kind of breeds you're using, what types of mating systems, and things of that nature that really outline what types of traits you really need to select for. Because the next step is to go and look at EPDs and performance information. And anybody who's looked at that information knows that there's a really large number of traits available for people to make selection decisions on. So the important thing is to really narrow that down to what traits are really important to each specific herd and what really determines profitability, so that we can really hone in on those traits when we make those selection decisions.
So it's much more than just showing up at the livestock barn and saying, yeah, that one looks good.
Absolutely, absolutely. You want to really prioritize those traits and have a chance to really sit down and look through the performance information in those EPDs on a set of bulls to really prioritize and rank those bulls based on the traits that are important to each producer.
So you've picked out the perfect bull from the EPDs and all of that. What is really the next step?
The next step is to go take a look at those bulls, because the EPDs are going to be our best selection tool for those performance traits,
Right.
but there are still other traits that are really, really economically important. So when we go out to visually evaluate those bulls, we want to make sure that they're structurally sound, that they move well on their feet and legs, and to make sure that we don't have any obvious disposition problems. And from there, we can take our prioritized list of bulls and really narrow them down so that we have an even smaller list of bulls that we really want to focus on purchasing. And then it's time to go to the ranch and really take a look at those bulls.
Now let's say we got the bull, we brought it home, and it's breeding season, and I have a newer bull and an older bull. What's really going to be the difference whenever it comes to breeding?
Older bulls will service a larger number of cows. So one thing to think about when you're thinking about what age of bull to buy, whether it's a yearling, an 18-month-old, or a 2-year-old bull, is how many cows you need that bull to breed. So that younger bull isn't going to be able to service quite as many cows right out of the gate as quickly as an older bull will be able to do.
Is there a length of time that a bull should be in the breeding season?
It really helps to have a defined breeding season rather than having a year-round breeding season where we keep the bull with the cows at all times.
Right.
And the advantage of that is really to have a bull out there so that we get calves within a defined period of time, and that helps us generate larger lots of animals for sale. You can typically get more money for them if you have a larger lot. So there's some advantages in terms of that, and also in terms of management, because if we have, for example, a 60-day breeding season, we may have some animals that get bred early and a few later, and they may calve a little early or calve a little late. So even with the 60-day breeding season, our calving season may actually be a little bit longer than that. So it really helps from a management perspective to know when those calves are coming to be able to manage those animals for that, particularly when it comes to breeding heifers.
Is AI an option?
AI is absolutely an option, and I think it's one of those tools that people tend to overlook, and I think it's really accessible even for smaller breeders, because one of the things that people don't often think about is that it's really expensive to go out and buy a bull, specifically if you think about needing a specialty bull, and by that I mean specifically to breed heifers. So it may actually be an advantage to go out and buy a bull that can be bred to all of the cows and really focus on AIing those heifers, where you can find very high accuracy, calving ease, AI sires to breed those heifers to. You might have to keep a few extra in case a couple of them don't breed, but those can be marketed later on. And then that also helps later on down the line when you have a small herd to prevent inbreeding, if you make sure that the bull that you buy for your cows isn't related to the bulls that you're AIing to.
Okay, thank you much, Megan. And for more information on this, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
We're in the midst of the spring calving season, which means we're only just a few weeks away from the start of a spring breeding season. And that means to me that we need to assess our bull battery to make sure that we have enough bulls ready to go for that upcoming spring breeding season. A couple of questions always arise when we talk about bulls. One, of course, is how many bulls do we need for our cow herd? Well, I use some old conservative rules of thumb to give us at least a guideline. And that is, if we have young bulls, I try to match the number of females with that young bull in terms of the same number of months he is in terms of his age. In other words, if he is a yearling, something that's 12 to 14 months of age when we first turn him out with cows or heifers, then that's kind of the maximum number that I would put him with. That bull that was a fall-born calf that now may be coming into about 18 months of age, then I think we can go with something like 15 to 18 cows with that particular bull. And then once we have that 2-year-old or older, certainly 24, 25 cows is a good average number to use. Now, we know there are bulls that can handle many more cows than that, but we also know from research that there's some bulls that don't do a very good job with even a few numbers of females that he's exposed to. We need to, first of all, make sure that these bulls have a breeding soundness exam. And once he's past that, then we observe those bulls closely during the first part of the breeding season. That's our best chance then to evaluate if these bulls can handle the number of females that we're exposing them to. Another question that often arises is the use of young bulls with old bulls in a multi-sire pasture. Generally, the research data would indicate that we're better off if we can keep those young bulls together and older bulls together. You see, those big older bulls are going to go ahead and be the dominant male in that breeding pasture and may whip that young bull not only physically but mentally. Australian research has indicated that some young bulls that have been put in breeding pastures with older bulls never really become the aggressive breeders later in life that we expect them to be. A good idea that some ranchers use is to put older bulls together in the first 2/3 of the breeding season and then rotate them out and put in the younger bulls in just the last third. That way those younger bulls are a little bit older before they're actually exposed to cows, and they should have fewer cows to breed because the older bulls have taken care of most of them. This is a couple of things to keep in mind as we go through the calving season and we're getting ready for the upcoming breeding season so that we have the best chance to have a high percentage of cows bred at the end of this year's breeding season, and that means, of course, a better calving season next year. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, joins us now. Kim, prices continue to decline.
And that's bothering me. That March contract, the KC March contract's getting down close to that $4.30 concrete bottom floor level that I've been talking about. Hopefully that we won't break through it. If we break through that level, then we could get down another 50 cents. Now we could go down and see 420, 425 momentarily for a couple of days and come back up, but I am watching this really close.
You're getting questions from producers, especially about prices versus cost of production. What's your take?
Well, the producers are wondering when price is going to get back up or get to the cost of production, which is about another 85 cents. We need about $5 wheat to be at variable cost of production. If you look at what's going on, we know that the U.S., if we lose a U.S. crop, then our cost of production per bushel goes up. So it's got to be a foreign crop, our foreign crops we lose. And we're really going to have to lose about 1.5 billion to 2 billion bushels of world production before prices will go up. And that won't happen until we get into the August, September, October time period. So it's a while probably before we'll see prices up, or we could see prices up at that $5 level.
With all of this happening, what kind of guidance do you give producers then?
Well, I think if prices are at the current levels when we get into harvest, this is the year to store wheat. You may want to sell some to pay your harvest costs or pay some bills, but I think if prices stay low, and I believe they will, that this is the year to risk that storage cost, to risk that interest cost, to store it into the fall and the winter. However, as you look around the world, the way this crop is progressing, it looks like production is going to be less than last year. That's good. But last year, our use is only 26.1 billion, and we produced 27 billion. We got to lose 900 million bushels on the world's production just to be even with use. So it's just not looking very good for prices to go up within maybe the next year and a half.
Okay, Kim Anderson, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.
It's getting to be the time of year a lot of people are thinking about conducting prescribed burns, and one of the first things that you need to do right after you start working on your fire plan is start figuring out your fire breaks. So fire breaks are designed to help cause a break in the fuel. They're not going to stop embers and stuff from floating across, but they're going to stop fire from creeping across on the ground. And so a good fire break is constructed down to bare ground or mineral soil. There's two things that a fire break does for you. Number one is that it delineates the burn unit. It tells everybody that's helping you burn, this is where we're burning at. The fire needs to stay within these confines of these fire breaks around this burn unit. Secondly, the fire breaks assist with allowing equipment and people to get around the burn unit easily and effectively and safely by having a place to travel. The next thing that you want to do with fire breaks is determine what's the best fire breaks that I need for my burn unit. Sometimes we do need fire breaks that are 8 to 10 foot wide, bare ground. Sometimes we can get by with smaller, narrower fire breaks or bare ground breaks on it if we use it in conjunction with mowing. So what mowing does, it helps reduce all the fuel, and then also the second thing that it does is it reduces the amount of intensity of that fire right next to that fire break. So if thinking about when we're disking a fire line, a lot of times we need to disc twice. So we'll disc one direction and turn around and disc the opposite direction because we want to make sure we incorporate all that vegetation into the ground so there's no continuous fuel on top for that fire to creep across. Also, we can incorporate a lot of different types of fire breaks, stuff that's already there. So again, county roads, 2-track roads from pastures, feed roads work great, creeks, any kind of crop fields, cultivated fields. Again, make sure that the crops that are planted there have been harvested or they are green. They're not flammable at the time that you're going to be burning. You know, big bodies of water. Again, we can use different types of fuel. So if you've got timber compared to grass areas, you can burn shortly after a rain. The leaf litter and mulch is wet. You can burn up into the trees and the fire should go out. And then you can come back later and burn that leaf litter when it dries out and you've got everything else around it burned down, so in black.
We're almost 3 months into 2016, and Daryl, how does 2016 compare to 15?
Well, a number of things are going to change in 2016. Beef production will begin to grow after declining for many years. The cattle slaughter will be part of that. Carcass weights are heavier, of course. That was an issue last year. It has been the last couple of years, but when we combine that with some growth in slaughter, we'll see beef production start to grow for the first time in a long time. And so, cattle numbers have been growing for a couple of years. We got new inventory numbers a couple of weeks ago, and those confirmed that we did start herd expansion. We actually started minimally in 2014, much more aggressively in 2015. That begins to show up as increased production in 2016, but really it's a process through this year and into next year and the year beyond when it really takes effect.
Let's talk more about the end beef numbers.
On the meat side, of course, beef production is going to grow, so per capita supplies will be bigger. Retail prices have already peaked. They're starting to work their way down, but from very, very unprecedented levels. When you look at the other meats, we've had ample supplies of pork and poultry this last year. 2015 was plagued by a lack of disease problems on the pork side, so we had lots of pork in the market because we planned for more losses. On the poultry side, of course, we had the avian influenza problems, which restricted exports and put more of that meat back into the domestic market. In 2016, we'll see a little increase in pork production, but probably rebounding exports, so actually less per capita consumption. On the poultry side, assuming we don't have any more avian influenza, that's a big wild card as we go forward, we'll probably see modest but minimal increases in poultry consumption this year as well. On the beef side, again, we've got increased production, but we're going to offset that to some extent with decreased imports. So beef consumption will be up, but not as much as the production will increase.
Now, you talked a little bit about trade in there. Let's kind of elaborate on the exports of the meats.
You know, for beef, we've had 2 years of very strong imports. We had record high prices. We had a limited supply. We had a strong dollar, all of which tends to favor imports of beef and discourage exports at the same time. Both of those things are beginning to moderate a little bit. Obviously, we're coming off of record high prices, so we've got a little bit of price that's favorable to exports and will disincentive the imports of beef. The dollar's still strong and probably will stay strong, so that's an issue that continues to be there. But the trade picture is kind of turning around as you would expect as we come off of record high prices, and will moderate some of what's going on with our domestic production.
2015 brought the rains. 2016, we're really benefiting from good wheat pasture. What do you see across the state?
You know, on the wheat pasture side, we're at the time of year where we're approaching first hollow stem. The wheat production guys tell us that in the southern part of the state we're probably at first hollow stem, so cattle that are going to come off if we're going to try to harvest the grain, got to come off. We'll be in the northern half of the state with that threshold here in the next few days probably. So we'll see some movement of cattle. We sometimes see a little bit of a wheat pasture run. On the other hand, wheat prices are pretty low. Some of these guys are thinking about grazing out the wheat, and so some of them actually need more numbers because you typically have to increase stocking numbers. So we've seen feeder cattle markets a little bit stronger seasonally the last couple weeks as a result of that.
If producers keep the wheat or keep the cattle on the wheat, do you see more influx of cattle?
There could be. I think there will be some additional demand for that. And at this point, with the good moisture conditions we've got, we've already got some folks starting to think about green grass for summertime. And so we'll see some additional stocker demand here over the next month or two.
What do corn prices look like for feed?
You know, feed prices will stay where they have been, which is relatively attractive. You know, they're higher by long-term historical standards, but significantly less than the last few years. That favors the feedlot side. Sometimes it favors them to the point of getting into trouble if they feed cattle too long, but in general it's a favorable thing, and we do see feedlot margins beginning to improve a bit over time.
A conversation I wouldn't have thought we'd had back in 2014. Daryl Pill, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
That'll do it for us this week. A reminder, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Remember, Oklahoma Ag starts at sunup.